It should have been a quiet ride home. But what I found on that back road, it still keeps me up at night. Lauren Banks gripped the steering wheel of her battered old Tacoma, knuckles white, as the truck hummed along a narrow, snow-packed stretch of rural highway. Outside, Montana's endless fields were blanketed in white, the sky just beginning to hint at dawn, that blue-black hush before the world wakes up. The only sounds were the soft rumble of the engine, the low drone of a country radio station, static almost louder than the music, and the wind rattling through the half-cracked window. Every so often, Lauren's mind drifted back to the clinic, replaying every second of the night shift she'd just crawled through. 14 hours on her feet, her scrub pants stiff with dried mud, and something darker. She could still see the trembling calf in her arms, the mother's wild eyes. She'd done everything right. But sometimes, everything just isn't enough. A failed delivery, a life lost, the kind that leaves a pit in your stomach and a whisper in your ear. Could I have done more? It was a question Lauren couldn't shake. Not tonight, not ever. The heater coughed lukewarm air as she rubbed tired eyes. This was supposed to be the easy part, the drive home, the reward for surviving one more brutal shift in the ER barn. Just 50 miles between her and a hot shower, maybe a microwave burrito, and a few hours of oblivion before doing it all over again. She barely noticed when the radio fizzled out completely, replaced by the rhythmic crunch of snow beneath her tires. The world felt empty out here, like she was the last person left alive. That's why the headlights slicing through the dawn caught her off guard. Not another car, but something on the side of the road, half swallowed by the drifting snow. At first, it looked like a boulder, big, hulking, a shadow at the edge of her vision. But then the shape seemed to move. Or maybe it was just the wind sculpting snow around it. Lauren slowed instinctively, curiosity overriding exhaustion. She squinted through the windshield, her breath misting in the frigid air. Barbed wire fence, sagging under the weight of the ice. Just beyond it, a brown mass, motionless. She flicked on her brights, illuminating a flash of dark mane tangled in the wire. Horse? Moose? Whatever it wasn't moving, wasn't making a sound. Her heart picked up, dread and adrenaline mixing into something sharp. Lauren pulled over, truck idling in the hush. The kind of hush that settles before something changes. When the universe leans in to see what you will do next. Part of her brain, the tired part, wanted to keep driving. Whatever was out there, it wasn't her problem. She was off the clock. She owed herself a break. But then she saw it. A flicker of an ear, barely visible beneath the crust of ice. Not dead yet. Not gone. The world shrank to the beam of her headlights and the shape beside the fence. Lauren stepped out, boots sinking into knee-deep snow, cold slicing through every layer. As she got closer, details snapped into focus. The animal was a horse, bay-colored, coated in frost. No steam rose from his sides. His legs trembled, but he didn't try to bolt. The rope holding him to the fence was frayed, tied tight enough to bite into flesh. He must have been out here for hours, maybe all night, with nothing but wind and darkness for company. Lauren's breath caught as she circled him, careful, her hands raised. Years of experience told her to watch for panic, to be ready for a kick, but this horse didn't even flinch. His head hung low, eyes dull and glassy, blood, already half frozen, crusted over wounds on his flanks. There was no fight left in him, just quiet surrender. "Hey, boy." Lauren's voice was soft, instinctively soothing, like she was talking to a lost child. "It's okay. I'm here." She dug through her coat for her old pocket knife, hands clumsy with cold. Every second counted. Hypothermia was already winning this battle. She knelt, snow burning through her jeans, and began sawing at the rope. The horse watched her, breath barely fogging in the freezing air. She whispered nonsense. Words meant more for herself than for him. Anything to keep from focusing on the horror of it, the ugly truth that someone had done this on purpose. Montana winters didn't forgive mistakes, and this was no accident. As the rope finally gave way, Lauren reached to steady him, but he just sank to his knees, collapsing with a dull thud that seemed to echo in the empty dawn. For one wild moment, she thought she was too late. She dropped the knife, stumbling forward, catching his heavy head before it hit the ground. The heat of his breath, faint and ragged, was proof, barely, that life still lingered. She cradled his head in her lap, the snow biting at her ankles, heart hammering so loud she was sure he could hear it. For a minute, all the world was silent. Just a woman and a dying horse on the edge of nowhere. The rising sun crept over the horizon, painting the snow in gold and blood. Lauren looked around. No other cars, no help coming. Just her truck, and a life hanging by a thread. She squeezed her eyes shut. It should have been a quiet ride home, she whispered to the empty fields. But not today. Not for you. And in that frozen silence, Lauren made a promise. She wouldn't let him die. Alone. Not out here. Not like this. Whatever it took, she would fight. For the horse, for herself. For a chance to rewrite the ending, even if it meant everything would change before the sun rose again. Lauren's breath hung in the air, clouds of vapor swirling around her as she crouched in the snow, cradling the bay gelding's head. Her gloves were already wet through, but she barely felt the cold. And the horse's eyes, once wild with pain, seemed almost empty now. A dull brown gaze that drifted past her, seeing nothing. There was no spark, no panic, no desperate struggle to get free. He'd given up. Lauren recognized that look all too well. The look of an animal pushed past its limits, past hope, past fear. She glanced at the rope again, cut clean, but the skin beneath it was raw, fur matted with blood. The horse's flanks bore fresh wounds, some shallow, others deep enough to expose angry flesh beneath. Dried mud and frozen urine crusted his legs, and every few seconds a muscle would twitch, almost as if he was trying to shake off a nightmare he couldn't escape. Easy now, Lauren whispered, forcing her hands to move slow, deliberate. It's gonna be okay. You hear me? She didn't even know if she believed it herself. Out here, the elements killed quicker than any predator, and this horse, whoever he belonged to, had been left to the mercy of the wind. A car zipped by in the distance, far down the highway, its lights barely visible. Nobody stopped. Nobody noticed the woman in the ditch, kneeling beside a dying animal. It struck Lauren how invisible suffering could be, even in the open. She brushed the thought aside and focused on the task at hand. No time for anger. Not yet. She slid one arm under the gelding's heavy jaw, supporting his head so he could breathe more easily. His ears barely twitched. His sides rose and fell so slowly it scared her. She pressed her gloved hand to his chest, feeling the faint, thready heartbeat beneath the frozen skin. She reached into her coat pocket, fumbling for her phone. The screen flickered. Cold slowed. She dialed the on-call vet at the clinic, voice trembling as she explained the situation. Hypothermic horse, unresponsive but alive, needs immediate care. Bring him in if you can move him. The vet's voice came through, clipped but concerned. We'll have a stall ready. Do you need backup? Lauren glanced at the horse's body, so heavy and still. He wasn't going anywhere under his own power. No time, she said. I'll get him loaded. She stood and ran to her truck, flipping open the battered horse trailer hitched behind it. She grabbed an old wool blanket from the cab and hurried back. The horse's breath rattled, a dry sound barely there. She spread the blanket over his neck and shoulders, tucking it tight, then pressed her forehead to his for a second, closing her eyes. The world was so quiet. The only sounds her own ragged breathing and the distant howl of wind over the fence. All right, big guy, she said, standing back up. Time to get you out of here. Lauren scanned the highway, then drew a deep breath. She hooked her arms under his neck and chest, heaving with all her strength. Inch by inch, she coaxed the horse to rise, crooning softly, digging her boots into the snow for leverage. The gelding wobbled, nearly collapsed again, but somehow, with a desperate surge, managed to stagger to his feet. Lauren didn't let go. She walked backward, step by slippery step, guiding him toward the open trailer. The horse's hooves slipped on the icy shoulder, and more than once, Lauren felt her heart stop as he faltered, legs buckling. Each time, she steadied him, whispering encouragement, fighting the urge to panic. The process took forever. Maybe it was minutes, maybe it was half an hour. Time lost all meaning in that blur of effort and cold. Finally, with one last push, the gelding made it up the ramp, collapsing into the pile of hay and blankets Lauren had thrown down inside. She slammed the trailer door and leaned against it, panting. Her arms shook, but she didn't let herself rest. There was still too much to do. Inside the cab, she cranked the heat and adjusted the rear view so she could see into the trailer. The horse was down, not moving except for the faint rise and fall of his chest. Lauren shifted into gear, her hands trembling as she pulled back onto the highway. She floored the gas, snow spraying behind her. Every bump in the road made her wince, imagining the pain it must be causing her passenger. For the next 26 miles, Lauren's mind was a whirl of worry and adrenaline. She talked to the horse the whole way. Nonsense words, stories about her long nights at the clinic, memories of other rescues, promises she hoped she could keep. "You're not dying on me. Not after this. I don't care what anybody else did to you. You're coming home." Each mile felt longer than the last. The windshield fogged up, blurring her vision, and she wiped it with the sleeve of her coat. The tire slipped on a patch of black ice, and for a split second she nearly lost control. The trailer fishtailed, and Lauren's heart leapt to her throat. She slowed down, gripping the wheel so tightly her knuckles ached. She kept glancing at the mirror, watching for signs of life. Anything, even the smallest movement. The horse didn't move, but he was still breathing. That was enough, for now. As the lights of the clinic finally appeared ahead, Lauren let out a shaky sigh. Relief flooded through her, chased immediately by a fresh surge of anxiety. She wasn't sure what waited for them at the other end of this ride. Hope, heartbreak, or both. But one thing was clear. She wasn't alone anymore. Not tonight. She pulled into the emergency bay, honking her horn for help. Staff in heavy coats and boots rushed out, swinging open the trailer. "What have we got?" someone called. Lauren couldn't find her voice. She just pointed, her whole body trembling with exhaustion and cold. They slid the ramp down, and working together, eased the gelding onto a waiting stretcher. He didn't fight, didn't flinch, just lay there, trusting these strangers, with the last of his strength. As they wheeled him inside, Lauren followed, whispering to herself, to the horse, to the silent, watching world. "Hold on, just a little longer. I'm not giving up on you." And deep inside, as the clinic doors swung shut behind them, Lauren knew this was only the beginning. Whatever came next, pain, hope, loss, she was in it now. For better or worse, she and the frozen survivor were in it together. The clatter of hooves and the scrape of boots echoed through the emergency barn as Lauren and the vet techs rushed the stretcher inside. The night's icy stillness was instantly replaced by a wave of frantic motion. Voices shouting orders, heat lamps wheeled into place, someone wrestling a heavy electric blanket over the gelding's battered frame. Fluids were hung, tubing snaked to his foreleg, and the heart monitor started its slow, steady beep. Lauren stood aside, her body shaking, not from the cold now, but from a helplessness that gnawed at her chest. In the hard, fluorescent light, the horse looked even worse. Dried blood caked into his mane, icicles hanging from his whiskers, flanks sunken and twitching. The vet, Dr. Warner, a broad-shouldered woman with a hawk's intensity, barked out stats: temperature dangerously low, pulse thready, signs of early frostbite along the ears and tail. Lauren watched as the staff worked, moving around the horse in a practiced, desperate choreography. She wanted to help, to do something, anything. But her brain was stuck on replay, spinning through every second since she found him by the fence. Maybe if she'd gotten there sooner, maybe if she'd driven just a little faster. But the horse's breath fogged in the barn air, proof he was still fighting, still here. Dr. Warner caught Lauren's eye. "You did good, bringing him in, but he's got a rough road ahead." She pointed to the wounds along his ribs, some old and scarred over, others raw and angry. "He's been through hell. Infection's already started, and the cold nearly finished him." Lauren swallowed, her hands balling into fists in her coat pockets. "Is he going to make it?" The vet didn't answer right away. As she glanced at the monitors, then back at the horse, "We'll do everything we can. He's got a shot because you found him, but it'll be up to him now." For a moment, the barn was still again, the chaos settling into anxious silence. Lauren knelt by the gelding's head, watching the slow, shallow rise and fall of his sides. She thought about her own exhaustion, how her eyelids felt like lead, how every muscle ached, and tried to imagine what it must be like for him, dragged through a Montana winter and left to die. "I'm not going anywhere," she whispered. "You're not alone. Not anymore." The words felt like a promise, binding her to him no matter what happened. As the hours crawled by, Lauren drifted in and out of the present, sometimes helping, sometimes just hovering, unable to pull herself away. She found herself talking to the gelding as they worked, her voice low and steady, sharing little stories about the barn, about horses she'd known, about why she'd taken this road in the first place. "Maybe you're not supposed to hear this," she said once, brushing a hand over his matted forelock. "But you're not dying on me. Not after what you've been through. Not after I found you. I'm stubborn. Ask anyone here. I'll fight for you, even if you're too tired to fight for yourself." Every so often, she'd catch herself looking for signs, anything, that he was still with her. A flick of the ear, a shudder that wasn't just the cold. Once, his eyes seemed to focus for a split second, just long enough to find her face before drifting shut again. That was enough to keep her anchored, to keep hope alive. Outside, dawn gave way to morning, then noon, but Lauren barely noticed the light changing. The world had shrunk to the size of the barn stall, to the slow ticking of the heart monitor and the gentle whir of the heaters. Texts came and went, but Lauren never left his side. She watched every drip of fluid, counted every breath. There were moments of panic. Once, his breathing slowed so much the monitor wailed. The team crashed into action, Dr. Warner barking orders. Lauren's heart nearly stopped as they adjusted IVs and checked his airway, but then, miraculously, his chest rose. Deep and steady, she slumped against the stall wall, breathless and grateful, wiping away tears she hadn't realized were there. Somewhere in that endless day, Lauren's phone buzzed. Her supervisor, checking if she was coming in for her next shift. She stared at the message, then silenced the phone. The hospital would survive one night without her. This horse might not. When the horse finally began to shiver, a violent, racking shudder that ran from nose to tail, the vet techs actually cheered. It meant his body was trying to warm itself, that the worst of the shock was passing. They wrapped him earthy in more blankets, swapped out the soaked ones for dry, and someone even managed to coax a sip of warm water into his mouth. Lauren let out a shaky laugh, a burst of relief cutting through her exhaustion. She crouched by his side, gently stroking his neck. "That's it. Fight, big guy. Show them you're not ready to give up." She found herself talking more as the hours passed, filling the silence with stories and encouragement. "You know, when I was a kid, I used to ride a little quarter horse named Sedan. She was stubborn as a mule, but she always came running when I called. I think you've got that same spark. You just need a little help finding it again." Sometimes she caught herself rambling, saying things she'd never said to another soul, about the loneliness of night shifts, about her failures and her fears, about the need to save something when the rest of the world felt impossible. Maybe the horse was listening, maybe not, but talking kept the fear at bay. The drive to the clinic, the frantic rescue, the desperate hope. It all circled in Lauren's mind like a storm. She remembered the way the horse's body felt in her arms, the absolute weight of him, and the way his eyes had closed as if surrendering to fate. She remembered the promise she'd made, the quiet oath whispered into the freezing dawn, "You're not dying on me." It was more than a vow. It was a lifeline. For both of them. As night fell and the barn grew quiet again, Lauren rested her head on the edge of the stall. The horse's breathing was slow but strong, the blankets rising and falling in time with his heartbeat. Someone brought her a cup of coffee, but it went cold in her hands as she watched over him. For the first time, she let herself believe he might actually make it. That maybe, just maybe, the worst was behind them. Lauren leaned in, her voice barely above a whisper. "You're not alone. I'll stay right here. You just keep breathing." "That's all I need you to do." And in the warm, gentle hush of the emergency barn, a connection began to grow. A thin, fragile thread of trust spun in the darkness, holding them both together against the cold. As the hours passed, the emergency barn transformed from a flurry of urgent movement into a kind of tense stillness, a waiting game where everyone counted breaths, watched numbers, and measured hope by the minute. The night shift crew had handed off to the day team. But Dr. Warner stayed, her concern for the horse overriding her usual clock-out time. She circled the stall every half of hour, clipboard in hand, checking vitals, monitoring the slow drip of fluids, her eyes flicking between the monitors and the battered bay on the straw. Lauren barely left Copper's side. She'd started thinking of the gelding as Copper, the name echoing in her mind even before she knew it for sure. The barn's heat pads glowed, warm air blasting, but she still felt the chill under her skin, a cold born of anxiety and helplessness rather than the Montana winter outside. Her own body had begun to rebel, hands shaking from exhaustion, stomach tight with hunger, head aching from lack of sleep and the stress pounding in her chest. Every so often, she'd close her eyes, only to see that endless, snow-swept highway, the rope, the blood, the horse's dull gaze. It haunted her, but she forced herself to stay present, to focus on every detail, the color of Copper's coat, the way his breath rattled, the rise and fall of his chest. In the stall, the chaos ebbed and flowed. There were moments of calm, warm hands brushing through Copper's mane, soft voices murmuring encouragement, broken by sudden spikes of tension. A monitor beeped too quickly, or the IV bag ran dry, or a patch of frostbite on Copper's ear turned an angry, worrying color. The barn seemed to hold its breath each time, waiting for something to go wrong. Lauren watched Dr. Warner and the techs spring into action, swapping IVs, checking wounds, debating antibiotics. She wanted to help, but for the first time in years she felt powerless. All she could do was stand aside, arms crossed tightly, biting her lip until she tasted blood. She'd always thought of herself as strong, capable in the face of disaster, able to keep her head when things fell apart. But now, as she looked at Copper's battered body, she felt something break inside her. The anger came in waves. Anger at whoever had left him, at the universe for making her the one to find him, at herself for not doing more, not being enough. Her legs finally gave out, and she slid down the stall wall, knees pulled to her chest. Her breath came out in shudders, and for a long moment she let the tears come, hot and angry, spilling down her cheeks. She tried to wipe them away before anyone could see, but Dr. Warner spotted her and knelt beside her. "You did the right thing, Lauren," the vet said quietly. "You gave him a chance he never would have had otherwise." Lauren shook her head, unable to speak. All she could see were Copper's wounds, the way his body trembled under the blankets, the memory of him collapsing in the snow. Dr. Warner rested a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Sometimes the hardest part is not knowing if it'll be enough, but hope's a stubborn thing. You just keep showing up. That's all you can do." Lauren nodded, forcing herself to breathe. She looked back at Copper. His eyes were half open now, unfocused but alive, as if the warmth of the barn and the soft sounds of human voices were slowly calling him back from the edge. A tech entered the stall with a scanner, brushing through Copper's tangled mane to find a small, faded brand. A beep from the handheld device signaled the discovery of a scan tag, an old, chipped ID embedded beneath his skin. The number flashed on the screen, and the tech typed it into the clinic's computer. Lauren stood, wiping her face with her sleeve, curiosity flickering in her exhaustion. What does it say? The tech scrolled through the database, then frowned. It says his registered name is Copper, owner's Alan Brigsby. He's from out near the county line. Dr. Warner's jaw tightened. Brigsby? That's a big name in ranching out here. Didn't expect one of his horses to end up like this. Lauren's stomach twisted. She'd heard the name before. Brigsby was known for his spotless reputation, his expensive cattle, his glossy horses at every county fair. What had gone so wrong that one of his animals ended up half dead on the side of the road? The vet dialed the number from the database and put the call on speaker. The phone rang 3 times before a gruff voice answered. "This is Alan Brigsby." "Mr. Brigsby? This is Dr. Warner at Gallatin Veterinary Hospital. We have a horse registered to you. Bay gelding. Scan tag matches your records. He was found tied to a fence on Highway 22. There was a long silence, then flat and dismissive. "You found that animal." "Damn thing's more trouble than he's worth. Skittish, always getting loose. He wasn't worth the hay anymore, so I left him. Figured the cold would do what I couldn't." Lauren felt white-hot fury bubble up inside her. She clenched her fists so tightly her nails dug into her palms. Dr. Warner's face was stone, but Lauren saw the disgust flicker in her eyes. "Mr. Brigsby, that's animal cruelty. We're reporting this to the board." The scoff. "Do what you want. He's yours now. I don't want him back." The call ended. The room was silent except for Copper's slow, labored breathing. Lauren turned to the vet, her voice shaking. Can I claim him? I mean, if no one else wants him." Dr. Warner's face softened. "You want to take him on after all this?" Lauren looked at Copper, broken, battered, but alive. She didn't hesitate. "Yes, I already have." The vet nodded. "We'll get the paperwork started. But you know this isn't going to be easy, Lauren. The board's going to want proof. There'll be a fight. And Copper, he's got a long road ahead." Lauren squared her shoulders. For the first time since this ordeal began, she felt something like hope. Sharp, bright, determined. "He's worth it. I won't give up." The clinic buzzed back to life around them. Phones ringing, monitors beeping, the hum of possibility in the air. Lauren squeezed Copper's shoulder gently, letting her voice carry her promise, "I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere." Through the noise, the anger, and the uncertainty, Lauren found her purpose. She would fight for Copper, no matter what, because sometimes showing up is the bravest thing you can do. And sometimes it's enough to change everything. Lauren barely slept that night, her mind a blur of rage, worry, and stubborn resolve. She kept replaying the words she'd heard over the speakerphone, Brigsby's callous, casual cruelty, the way he spoke about Copper as if he were just a faulty machine to be discarded. Outside, a fresh flurry of snow blanketed the parking lot, while inside, the emergency barn was still, its lights dimmed for the night. Only the soft hum of heaters and the occasional cough from a horse down the row disturbed the quiet. But in Lauren's head, everything roared. She sat at Copper's stall, knees drawn to her chest, exhaustion weighing down every part of her. She'd washed her face and changed into a clean set of scrubs, but nothing could erase the sense of grime that clung to her, not just from the rescue, but from what she'd learned about people like Brigsby. He had a reputation built on glossy appearances, prize ribbons, and hearty handshakes at the county fair, but it was all a veneer. Beneath the surface, he could cast off a living creature just because it was inconvenient and expect no one to question him. The clinic's day crew had taken over, moving quietly in the early morning hush. Dr. Warner had given Lauren a cot in the break room, but Lauren found herself drifting back to the stall, unable to let go. Every time she checked on Copper, she found herself whispering small reassurances. You're safe now. Nobody's going to hurt you again. You're home, if you want it." She hoped, somehow, that he understood. Just before dawn, a tech entered with a clipboard, glancing over Copper's notes and vitals. He's holding steady. Temperature's up, still shaky, but he's a fighter. Lauren nodded, grateful, but her heart clenched when she saw Copper flinch at the tech's touch, eyes shying away from the hand that checked his IV. The paperwork was already in motion. Dr. Warner had started a file with the local livestock cruelty board, documenting every injury, every infection, every photo Lauren had taken on the snowy roadside. They'll need all of the proof we can give them, Dr. Warner had said. Brigsby might want to forget about Copper, but the board needs to see the cost of that choice. Mid-morning, the clinic phone rang again. Lauren listened from the hallway as Dr. Warner fielded questions from the authorities: date and time of discovery, the condition of the animal, photographic evidence, records from the scan tag. Lauren contributed her statement, voice steady despite the fire in her chest. She described finding Copper, the frozen rope, the wounds on his flanks, the way he'd collapsed without a fight. It was a process Lauren found both infuriating and necessary. Every detail needed to be perfect, every step documented, as if Copper's suffering had to be measured and cataloged before it would matter. But Lauren refused to let her anger become recklessness. She'd fight for Copper within the rules, and she'd win. Around noon, a sheriff's deputy arrived at the clinic, boots thudding on the rubber barn mats. He took photos, interviewed Lauren and the staff, and inspected the stall. Copper watched the stranger warily, nostrils flaring, legs trembling, but refusing to collapse again. Lauren stood nearby, a silent shield, making sure nobody made any sudden moves or raised their voice. When the deputy finished, he offered Lauren a tired, understanding nod. "You did a good thing, finding him when you did. Not every story like this ends with a survivor." Lauren's throat tightened, but she just nodded, brushing Copper's neck as the deputy left. Back in the break room, Lauren made a list of everything she'd need: more photos, injury logs, witness statements. She started a timeline, pinning every moment to paper with precise detail. What she saw, when she saw it, how Copper responded to care. The clinic staff pitched in, providing medical records and daily updates on Copper's progress. It was a mountain of paperwork, but Lauren tackled it with a ferocity she didn't know she possessed. It wasn't just about Copper anymore. It was about justice, about making sure someone like Brigsby couldn't just walk away, about making sure the board had no choice but to do the right thing. In the midst of the bureaucracy, something subtle began to change between Lauren and Copper. For hours, he'd hardly lifted his head, too weak or too wary to respond to anything but the gentlest touch. But that afternoon, as Lauren walked into the stall, he turned to look at her, ears flicking forward. His eyes were still clouded, but they focused on her, really focused, as if trying to remember where he'd seen her before. "Hey, buddy," Lauren murmured, squatting down beside him. "You're looking a little brighter." She reached out, and this time, Copper didn't flinch away. Instead, he sniffed her hand, nostrils fluttering, and Lauren felt a surge of hope stronger than any victory in the paperwork battle. She stayed with him most of the afternoon, reading aloud from a battered old book of horse care that someone had left in the tack room. She told him about the clinic, about the other horses and their stories, about the Montana wind and the way it sounded when it raced across the fields in spring. Copper listened, or at least he didn't look away. When Dr. Warner came to check on them, Lauren stood and gave her a shaky smile. "I want to be the one to claim him," she said, voice firm. "I know it's not official yet, but I already have. He deserves better, and I think he wants to stay." Dr. Warner regarded her quietly, then nodded. "You've got a stubborn streak, Lauren. That's what it takes." She glanced at Copper, then back at Lauren. "We'll make it official. The board will have questions, and there'll be a fight. But Copper's got you in his corner now, and sometimes that's all it takes." For the first time since the rescue, Lauren felt something close to relief. The battle wasn't over. There would be hearings, forms to fill, maybe even a courtroom. But the momentum was on their side. Copper was healing, however slowly, and he had someone fighting for him. That night, as Lauren left the stall, Copper whickered, soft and uncertain, but a sound that carried hope. Lauren stopped, heart pounding, and smiled. "You're going to be okay," she whispered. "We both are." And as the barn lights dimmed, Lauren realized she'd made another promise. To Copper, to herself, and maybe to every abandoned thing she'd ever rescued. She would see this through. She would rewrite the ending. The days that followed blurred into a relentless grind of forms, phone calls, and frustration. Lauren found herself swept up in the kind of battles she never imagined she'd have to fight, not with a horse's life hanging in the balance. The Montana Livestock Cruelty Board, a faceless panel of regulators, demanded documentation for every bruise and scar. Each night, Lauren huddled at the tiny desk in the clinic break room, piecing together a case that could decide Copper's fate. She learned quickly that rescue didn't end with the moment you cut a rope. It was an ongoing war, fought in triplicate copies and time-stamped photos, in the cold language of medical records and the slow, infuriating churn of bureaucracy. Every day, Copper's file grew thicker. Color photos of the raw, chafed skin around his neck, detailed injury logs for each cut and scrape, a timeline that began with Lauren's headlights slicing through a snowy Montana morning, and followed Copper's every heartbeat since. Dr. Warner became Lauren's anchor through it all, guiding her with the steadiness of a battle-tested general. "Take clear pictures. Show every angle, every wound," she'd remind. "Write down everything you remember. The board will look for holes in your story. Don't give them any." So Lauren did. She photographed Copper's wounds every morning and evening, labeling each shot with date and time. She sat with the staff in the vet office, reviewing Copper's temperature logs, IV fluid reports, antibiotic dosages, and even the grainy video from the security camera that captured her staggering through the doors with Copper half dead on the stretcher. She took statements from every tech who'd seen Copper that first night. The way he trembled, the way he collapsed, how he'd barely responded to touch. There was even a short, stilted interview with the sheriff's deputy, voice scratchy but resolute. No horse gets like that in a day. He was left out there. Yet, even as she built her case, Lauren felt a constant sense of dread, like she was running a race she could never quite finish. Each night, she'd try to sleep in the tiny cot, only to wake with Copper's image in her mind, tied to that fence, eyes dull, body so still she wasn't sure he was alive. Some nights she couldn't eat, her stomach twisted into knots. Some mornings she wandered the snowy parking lot, breath steaming, desperate for air, and through it all, Copper's fight to live became her own. But not all the days were bleak. Sometimes a small bright thing would break through, a sign that the world hadn't given up, like the time Lauren found a note taped to the staff coffee pot. "We believe in you and in Copper. Don't quit." Or the way the day crew started saving apple slices and carrots from their lunches, dropping them in a bowl at Copper's stall. Still, doubt was always there. One evening, as Lauren prepared a new round of documentation, Dr. Warner joined her at the desk, sipping her coffee. "The board's not quick with these cases," she said, her tone careful but honest. "You might wait weeks for a decision. Are you up for that?" Lauren met her gaze, jaw set. "Have to be. I keep picturing him tied to that fence. If I stop now, he'll just become another file in someone's drawer." She looked down at her notes, hands trembling. "It's not just about Copper. It's about every animal someone gives up on." Dr. Warner nodded. "You're doing right by him, but don't forget yourself in all this." Lauren managed a tired smile. "He's all I can think about." By the third week, exhaustion had hollowed Lauren's face, her voice raspy from lack of sleep and constant talking, explaining, arguing, pleading with board officials. She was living on vending machine snacks and coffee, every waking minute spent at the clinic or on the phone. She couldn't bring herself to leave Copper, not even for a night. When she did doze off, it was in a chair outside his stall, boots up on a bale of hay, half dreaming of paperwork and snow. Late one evening, after a storm blew through and left the world silent and shining outside, Lauren trudged back from the copy room with another stack of paperwork. As she passed Copper's stall, something made her pause. He was standing, not just lying flat, but standing, unsteady but upright. His ears pricked forward as Lauren approached, and for the first time, a faint, hopeful sound filled the air. A low, tentative whinny. It was thin and rough, but to Lauren, it was more beautiful than any music she'd ever heard. She froze, stunned, afraid to even breathe. Copper's head turned toward her, nostrils flaring, and for the first time since that terrible night, there was a spark, something alive and curious. Something that said, "I remember you." Lauren set the paperwork aside and slid quietly into the stall. "Hey there, buddy," she whispered, barely able to keep her voice steady. "You miss me?" She reached out, palm up, letting him come to her. Copper sniffed her fingers, then nudged her hand, breath warm and real. Tears stung her eyes as she stroked his nose. "That's it. You keep fighting. I'll keep fighting. We're in this together, you and me." Her heart hammered with hope, fierce and sudden. The night shift techs wandered over, one of them grinning. "Heard him call for you? First time I've seen him do that." Lauren beamed, feeling a warmth bloom in her chest that no heater could match. That night, Lauren stayed by Copper's stall, long after the rest of the clinic had quieted. She brought in an old portable radio and tuned it to a bluegrass station, letting the soft twang fill the barn. She sat in the straw, reading aloud from her horse care guide, her voice slow and even, letting the rhythm lull them both. She knew the road ahead was still uncertain. The board hadn't ruled, the paperwork wasn't finished. Copper's wounds were far from healed, but as he stood there, listening, something fragile and vital passed between them. A thread of trust, spun from pain and persistence, the kind that only grows in the fire of adversity. For the first time in weeks, Lauren allowed herself to hope, not just for Copper, but for herself. Maybe she couldn't save every horse in Montana. Maybe she couldn't fix all the things that broke in the world, but tonight, she could sit with a survivor and promise, "You're not alone anymore, not ever again." And somewhere, in the silence of the winter night, a story began to change, not because of luck, but because someone, finally, refused to walk away. Mornings at the clinic always arrived with a sting, frost rhyming the barn windows, bitter wind searching out every crack in the siding. But as February stretched on, Lauren noticed something shifting inside Copper's stall. It was a change so subtle, most would miss it. A slight tilt of the head when she entered, an ear flicked forward, the way his eyes now found her, searching for something familiar. Each small sign of life felt like a tiny sunrise breaking through the Montana cold. Lauren started her days the same way, steaming mug of weak clinic coffee in one hand, a battered notepad in the other. She'd slip quietly into Copper's stall, careful not to startle him. For the first time, he would lift his head when she came in, nostrils twitching at the scent of hay and apples. It was a look not of fear, but of wary curiosity, as if he was deciding whether or not to trust this human who kept showing up. She began every morning by cleaning his stall, working slowly, narrating each movement. "Let's see, Copper. Time to freshen up your bedding. Sorry about the noise. Can't have you sleeping in a mess." She spoke softly, her words a steady thread in the chilly air. The old bluegrass radio played quietly in the background, the twang of guitar and fiddle weaving a kind of safety net around them both. It was during one of these routines that Lauren noticed Copper watching her, not just with dull resignation, but with something almost like hope. She met his gaze, smiling gently. "You're getting better at this, huh?" she said, reaching for the broom. "Didn't think I'd be your maid, but here we are." Copper's ears perked at her voice, and Lauren's heart swelled at the subtle but unmistakable change. The rest of the clinic started noticing, too. "He's got his eyes on you," joked Kelly, the morning tech, as she delivered a fresh bucket of water. "Betty's waiting for you to bring breakfast." Lauren grinned, a warmth bubbling up inside her that she hadn't felt in weeks. As the days passed, Copper's improvements came in fits and starts. There were setbacks, an infection that threatened to flare, a fever that had Dr. Warner fretting and Lauren up all night. But there were victories, too. Copper eating a full ration of grain for the first time, his coat beginning to shed its winter dullness, a wound along his shoulder knitting closed, pink and healthy. Each milestone was met with a quiet celebration. A rub along his neck, an extra apple slice, a whispered, "Good boy, you did it." Lauren began spending her lunch breaks in the stall, reading aloud from horse care guides and old paperback novels she found in the break room. Copper would stand nearby, his body still frail but his ears swiveling toward her voice. Sometimes she'd play music, letting the gentle melodies fill the space between them. It became their ritual, a secret world built out of routine and patience, trust earned 1 minute at a time. One snowy afternoon, as Lauren read the last lines of a dog-eared book, Copper took a shaky step toward her, sniffing the sleeve of her sweatshirt. Lauren froze, not wanting to startle him, barely breathing as he nosed her hand. For a moment she felt the old ache of fear. Would he shy away? Would he turn his head? But he stayed, warm breath on her palm, his eyes soft and searching. "You're not alone anymore, not ever again," Lauren whispered, fighting the sting of tears. She let him explore, let him decide how much contact he wanted. When he stepped back, she didn't push. She just smiled, knowing how much courage it took for him to come close at all. The bond between them deepened with every passing day. Copper began to eat more, lifting his head eagerly when Lauren brought in fresh hay. Sometimes, so when the barn was quiet at night, she'd catch him whickering softly at the sound of her footsteps. Even the other horses seemed to sense the change. No longer the broken, silent presence. Copper was coming back to himself, bit by bit. For Lauren, these small victories became her lifeline. The outside world, the calls from the cruelty board, the relentless paperwork, the shadow of Brigsby's cruelty, faded each time she stepped into the stall. The only thing that mattered was Copper's progress, the fragile thread of trust they wove together, and stronger each day. There were setbacks, of course. Some mornings, Copper would stand listlessly, refusing his grain, eyes shadowed by old pain. On those days, Lauren would sit beside him, telling him stories from her own life, about the first horse she ever loved, the way the mountains looked in summer, the dreams she had as a kid about becoming a vet. She didn't know if Copper understood, but it didn't matter. What mattered was that he never faced the darkness alone. One night, as a blizzard howled outside, Lauren bundled up and walked the silent corridor to Copper's stall. The barn was nearly empty, the other horses dozing. She settled in the straw, reading by the glow of her phone. Copper came to stand beside her, resting his chin on the stall door, listening to her voice as she read a chapter about wild mustangs on the plains. The wind rattled the windows, but inside, it was warm, safe, a world apart. As the weeks wore on, Lauren noticed Copper watching her with new intensity, tracking her movements, responding to her words. His eyes were brighter, his step a little surer. One morning, when she arrived before sunrise, he whinnied. A real, clear sound, not the feeble attempt from before. Lauren laughed, tears springing to her eyes, and leaned into the stall to press her forehead against his. "Look at you," she murmured. "You remember what it's like to be a horse again, huh?" Spring was still a distant promise, but hope had rooted itself deep in the straw and timbers of the barn. Lauren knew the fight with the board wasn't over. Brigsby still hadn't faced real consequences, and the paperwork felt endless. But the true measure of progress was right there in Copper's steady gaze, in the way he leaned into her touch, in the simple fact that he was still here. "You keep fighting, Copper," she whispered as she left each night, "and I'll keep showing up. We're not done yet." Outside, the Montana wind swept across the frozen fields, but inside the barn, something fierce and stubborn bloomed, a bond no cruelty could undo, a promise that this time, neither of them would ever have to face the darkness alone. The snow began to melt in ragged patches around the clinic's gravel lot, the first shy hints of spring making their slow way across rural Montana. Each day, Lauren noticed more sunlight slipping through the high barn windows, softening the hard lines of winter and painting Copper's coat with flecks of gold as he dozed in his stall. Life was coming back to the world, inch by inch. And Copper was changing, Bernie too. His wounds had mostly healed, the worst of the frostbite leaving behind ragged edges on one ear and a patch of skin along his tail that would never grow hair again. But his eyes, once empty, now followed Lauren with keen awareness. When she came into the barn each morning, he would lift his head, ears swiveling, and give a soft nicker of greeting, a sound Lauren had come to crave, as if it confirmed she'd done something right in a world where so much could go wrong. By now, Lauren had memorized every quirk of his personality. Copper was gentle with the techs, but shy about new faces. He'd back into a corner if someone entered his stall too abruptly, but he relaxed when Lauren was around, especially if she spoke quietly and moved slowly. She'd even caught him, more than once, cocking his head at the bluegrass tunes playing from her old radio, swaying almost imperceptibly to the music. They'd settled into a rhythm that felt both ancient and new. Lauren would clean his stall, check his water and feed, then settle on an upturned bucket with a horse care guide or a mystery novel. Sometimes she simply talked about nothing and everything, about her childhood, about her dreams, about the other horses she'd known, about her stubborn hope for a world where compassion didn't have to be extraordinary. Copper listened, or seemed to. He was always close, always present. One afternoon, Lauren was laying down fresh bedding, humming along to a Willie Nelson tune floating from the radio. She'd nearly finished when she sensed Copper moving behind her. A cautious, measured step, as if he were trying not to startle her. She kept her movements slow, her voice gentle. "Almost done, big guy. I'll be out of your way in a sec." But she felt a gentle pressure at her side, not a shove or a nudge, but something softer, Copper's head resting firmly but tenderly against her hip. Lauren froze, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't move, hardly dared to breathe. Every instinct screamed at her to stay still, to let him decide how close he wanted to come. Copper didn't pull away. Instead, he pressed in a little closer, his breath warm against her ribs, his eyes half closed in a kind of quiet trust. For a moment, time seemed to hang suspended. Lauren closed her eyes, letting herself feel the weight of him, the heavy, honest presence of a creature who had every reason to fear, but chose instead to reach out. She set the pitchfork down, hands shaking, and slowly, carefully, let herself rest her palm on the velvet of his neck. Copper exhaled a long, deep sigh, and Lauren felt the heat of it through her shirt. It was as if a wall between them, built of trauma and distrust, crumbled in that instant. All the nights spent whispering comfort, all the hours watching over him, all the promises she'd made, they came together in that first unguarded touch. It was wordless, powerful. Forgiveness, acceptance, and hope, all tangled together. Lauren whispered, "That's it, boy. You're safe now. I've got you." She didn't dare move too quickly. The world outside, the fight with the livestock board, Brigsby's looming shadow, the ache of exhaustion fell away. For that moment, there was nothing but the horse and the woman, breathing together in a pool of golden afternoon light. When Copper finally shifted, it wasn't to shy away, but to lean in a little further. He laid his head gently against her shoulder, heavy and trusting, then and Lauren let herself cry. Silent tears of gratitude and relief. It wasn't dramatic, not the way the movies would show it, but it was more real, more beautiful, because it had been earned. She stayed there, motionless, until her legs started to cramp, and Copper gave a soft, questioning snort. Lauren laughed, wiping her face with the back of her hand. All right. I'll get out of your way." She stepped back, careful not to break the moment, and Copper watched her, steady and calm. He had chosen her, not just for care or food, but for the thing every living being longs for: connection. That evening, the whole clinic seemed lighter, News of Copper's breakthrough spread among the staff. Kelly, the tech, left an extra apple in his bucket. Dr. Warner grinned when she heard, clapping Lauren on the back. Told you he'd come around. Just takes the right person and a whole lot of patience. Lauren couldn't stop smiling. She found herself humming as she finished her chores, glancing into Copper's stall more often than she needed to, just to see if he was still watching her. He was. Later that night, after the last of the staff had gone home, Lauren came back to the barn with a blanket and an old paperback. She settled on the straw, legs tucked under her, and started reading aloud, her voice quiet in the hush of the sleeping horses. Copper stood beside her, not quite touching, but close enough that she could hear his breathing, could feel the warmth radiating from his side. She read until her voice grew hoarse, then just sat, soaking in the peace. At some point, Copper shifted again, pressed his head gently to her shoulder, and exhaled. Lauren closed her eyes, letting the trust between them fill the dark barn with something brighter than any light. That was the moment I knew. We weren't strangers anymore, she whispered, the words for her, for him, for the world that so often forgot how much healing is possible with patience and kindness. You're family now. And as the moon rose over the quiet ridge outside, Lauren understood that saving Copper had done more than rescue a broken horse from a back road. It had called forth the best in herself. That bond, once fragile and tentative, was now strong enough to carry them both toward whatever came next. The last of the hard Montana winter ebbed away, replaced by bursts of sunlight and the slow greening of the fields around the clinic. Each day, Lauren walked into the barn with a fresh sense of hope. Copper was no longer the battered survivor she'd found tangled in the snow. He was standing strong, eating heartily, his bay coat growing glossy in the warming light. Even the other horses seemed to notice the change, no longer regarding him as the frail newcomer, but greeting him with friendly snorts as he ventured out for short walks in the paddock. Lauren had started taking him outside each morning, leading him carefully through the muddy thaw, letting him stretch his legs and feel the earth beneath his hooves again. The first time she unlatched his stall, Copper hesitated, muscles tensing, eyes darting as if expecting a hidden threat. Lauren didn't rush him. She waited, murmuring encouragement, until he finally took that brave first step, head high, ears pricked to the wind. By April, Copper was a different horse. The staff marveled at his transformation. "Wouldn't believe it if I hadn't seen it," Kelly said one morning, watching as Copper trotted beside Lauren, tail flicking, eyes bright. "He's got some spark now, that's for sure." Still, the process of making him officially hers dragged on. The cruelty board, bogged down by paperwork and procedure, had yet to render a verdict. Lauren kept her focus, submitting every report and photo, responding to endless emails and phone calls, determined not to let the system fail Copper now. Dr. Warner stayed on her side, testifying to Copper's condition when he arrived and the progress he'd made. Finally, one blustery afternoon, Lauren's phone buzzed with a new message. She read the subject line, heart pounding, "Copper, petition approved." She blinked, read it again, then let out a laugh so full of joy that the entire clinic looked up from their work. She ran to the barn, waving her phone like a trophy. "He's mine," she shouted, voice shaking with emotion. "Copper is officially mine." The staff crowded around, clapping her on the back, celebrating a victory that felt bigger than just one animal. It was a win against indifference, a reminder that compassion, though hard won, could still tip the scales. That night, Lauren returned to Copper's stall, carrying a small, wrapped package. She set it on the straw, heart thumping as she untied the string. Inside was a handmade halter, a deep chestnut leather to match his coat, sturdy but soft, with a brass nameplate that gleamed in the barn light. "Copper if found, call home." She slipped the halter over his head, buckling it with careful hands. Copper stood perfectly still, as if sensing the significance of this small ceremony. Lauren traced the letters on the nameplate, eyes shining. "You've got a home now, Copper. No one will ever take that from you again." The next morning, Lauren led Copper out of the barn, and this time with no lead rope, just the halter and her steady voice to guide him. She walked ahead, pausing at the open gate to the clinic's back field. For a moment, Copper stood still, considering his choices. Then, with deliberate grace, he followed, head lowered, steps confident, his trust in her absolute. It was a crisp, blue morning, the kind that makes the sky seem impossibly vast. Lauren walked through the dew-wet grass, feeling the soft give of earth beneath her boots, Copper at her side. She didn't look back, trusting him to stay with her, knowing the fragile bond they'd built could finally hold. The staff watched from the fence line, quiet and awed as Lauren and Copper walked the ridge above town. The air was sharp with the scent of new grass and sun-warmed earth. Lauren paused on a small rise, looking out over the valley. Copper stopped beside her, shoulder to shoulder, and for a moment neither moved. She ran her hand along his neck, feeling the strength beneath his skin, the power that had once been nearly snuffed out. She thought of the first time she'd seen him, motionless in the snow, and marveled at how far they'd come. "Look at you," she murmured, voice thick with emotion. "If they could see you now?" Copper turned his head, nudging her shoulder with his soft muzzle, as if agreeing. They stayed there a long while, watching the sun climb higher. Lauren let herself imagine a future. Quiet rides through the foothills, lazy afternoons under the cottonwoods, Copper running free in green pastures. She realized, in that stillness, that she'd been changed by this journey as much as he had. The part of her that had nearly given up, on herself, on people, on the possibility of healing, it had been coaxed back to life, just like him. As they headed back down the hill, Copper walked at her side without hesitation. There was no need for rope, no need for reminders. He followed her by choice, step for step, trusting her to lead the way. For Lauren, it was the truest kind of victory, not just the legal battle won, but a wounded soul restored to hope. That night, she wrote a letter to the cruelty board, not out of anger, but gratitude. She described Copper's progress, attached new photos of him in the sun, coat shining, eyes clear. "Thank you for giving us a chance," she wrote. Copper is not just a survivor. He's family. The barn settled into its evening hush. The animals fed, the lights dimmed. Lauren knelt beside Copper's stall, pressing her forehead to his shoulder, feeling his breath ruffle her hair. He was whole, and so was she. They had made it through the darkness together. Now, standing on the edge of a new life. Lauren knew that whatever came next, Copper would never have to walk alone. And neither would she. The weeks that followed felt almost unreal, too gentle, too golden after so much darkness. Spring came to Montana with quiet insistence. The air softened, the fields around the clinic exploded into new green, and the last drifts of snow shrank into the shade under the cottonwoods. With every passing day, Lauren and Copper found a new rhythm, a life no longer defined by crisis, but by small, shared moments of peace. Lauren often woke before dawn, sipping coffee on the porch of her rented house outside town, watching the fog burn off the distant ridges. She felt a kind of fullness she'd never known before. The exhaustion, the endless adrenaline of the rescue, the sleepless, paperwork-heavy nights, they all seemed to melt away with the season's change. She carried a quiet pride in her chest. She had not only saved a horse, she had chosen to keep showing up long after the worst was over. Copper became a fixture at the clinic, beloved by staff and visitors alike. Children from the local elementary school came to visit, standing on tiptoe at his stall to feed him apples and carrot sticks. Even Dr. Warner, usually gruff and guarded, would linger to scratch Copper's chin and shake her head in amazement at his recovery. Lauren didn't try to erase Copper's past. She knew some wounds never fully healed. His ear would always have a jagged edge, and a patch of skin along his side would never grow hair again. But he wore these marks the way a soldier wears medals, silent evidence of battles fought and survived. And if he flinched at loud noises or sudden movement, Lauren never rushed him. She let him come to her, always on his terms, her patience a soft net for his trust. On the first truly warm evening of the year, Lauren led Copper up a winding path behind the clinic to a ridge overlooking the town. The sunset poured gold across the valley, lighting up Copper's chestnut coat so it seemed to glow from within. Lauren carried a picnic blanket, a thermos of tea, and a heart still raw with gratitude. She moved slowly, letting Copper set the pace. At the top, she spread out the blanket and sat down in the grass. Copper wandered a few feet away, grazing, then circled back and stood quietly at her side. The world felt suspended, caught between light and shadow. The distant hum of cars, the lowing of cattle on a neighboring ranch, the wind rustling the new leaves, all faded into a deep, ringing silence. Lauren reached up and wrapped her arm around Copper's strong neck, pulling him gently closer. He lowered his head to her shoulder, the weight of it warm and heavy, and for a moment, neither of them moved. In that stillness, Lauren thought of everything it had taken to get here. The frozen highway, the frantic rescue, the endless fights with the board, the long, uncertain nights. She thought of the promises she'd whispered into Copper's mane, of the hope she'd nursed in the dark barn, refusing to let go. She realized sitting there that this moment was the answer to all those doubts and fears. She pressed her face into Copper's neck and let herself breathe, slow and steady, drawing in the scent of grass and horse and the faint sweetness of wildflowers on the wind. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe that neither of them would ever be alone again. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in streaks of pink and orange, Lauren looked out over the town. She could see the rooftops, the church steeple, the flicker of headlights on the main road. Somewhere out there, people were starting their evening routines, making dinner, turning on porch lights, calling loved ones home. Lauren spoke softly, almost to herself, but Copper seemed to understand. He wasn't saved by luck. He was saved because someone stopped when no one else did. And now, he knows he's never going to be left behind again. Copper nuzzled her arm in answer, as if to say, "I believe you, I'm home." The moment lingered as twilight settled over the ridge. Lauren knew there would be challenges ahead. Life was never finished with its tests. But she also knew, deep in her bones, that she was no longer the woman who doubted her worth at the start of this journey. She had fought for something that mattered. She had chosen hope over and over, until hope became as natural as breathing. As the first stars appeared, Lauren rose and led Copper back down the hill, hand resting on his withers, their steps in perfect time. She left the gate open as they entered the pasture, letting Copper decide whether to stay close or wander. He stayed, never straying far. That night, as Lauren tucked herself into bed, she thought of all the stories she'd heard from people who had given up, who believed compassion made no difference in a world so often hard and unforgiving. She wished she could tell them what she had learned, that kindness is never wasted, that the act of showing up, especially when it's hard, has the power to rewrite endings. As her eyes drifted closed, she imagined telling Copper's story, her voice steady and warm. If this story moved you, share it. Compassion can't undo the past, but it can rewrite the ending. Out there, someone is still waiting for a second chance. And maybe it's yours to give. And somewhere, maybe in another cold barn, another lonely pasture, someone would hear those words and decide to stop, to help, to believe that even the smallest act of mercy can change a life forever. If this story touched you, remember, every day, someone, human or animal, is waiting for a second chance. Sometimes it only takes one person to make the difference. If you can, be that person, like, share, and follow our channel for more stories of hope and courage, because compassion, even in the quietest moments, can echo farther than you'll ever know.